Here I speak with Seth Dellinger. He is a Feldenkrais practitioner. This has been a conversation a long time in the making. We have rescheduled so many times I've lost track. So it was a real pleasure to sit down with Seth finally. Part of what I've taken away from this conversation is how the word movement is relevant to well-being across the board. Seth's work focuses on movement of the physical body. I like to think that my kind of psychotherapy is focused on movement too. Relational movement, how we move together in relationships, but also inner movement. How much latitude, longitude, and fine-grained nuance can we bring to our inner space, our inner world, our interiority as individuals? The more space I can experience inwardly, and the more movement I have at my disposal there, the more options and possibility open up for movement in relationships, what I'm terming relational movement. And so much of this requires or relates back to the physical body and vice versa. Each realm, body and psyche, may really just be a different map of the same terrain underneath it all. This conversation is a starting point for a hopefully longer exploration over time of the intersection between the way that I practice ISTDP with the way that Seth practices Feldenkrais and seeing what can emerge from there. I hope that it's of some interest to you out there. Please do check out Seth's website and his online resources, all detailed in the description box. I can sort of start by saying that my sense, at least, is that there's a lot of overlap when we think about Feldenkrais. Am I saying that right? Okay. When I think about Feldenkrais, the little that I know about it, and ISTDP, which is the direction I guess I'm coming from, what I find compelling about what I know about Feldenkrais is I've been thinking with ISTDP for a while. We have so much focus on emotions in that method of psychotherapy. And the emotions obviously are in the body. We experience them in the body. So there is a real body focus to some degree. And we also focus on anxiety discharge pathways, which I can talk about a little if that's of interest, which is also obviously in the body. And yet it seems like it's lacking further elaboration. Like there's more that we could be doing with the body, is my sense. There's more. It still does ultimately become a bit of a talk therapy. I just get the sense there's more information and knowledge and wisdom from the body that we could be bringing into the practice. Feldenkrais has always been of interest to me in that regard. I haven't spent a whole lot of time immersing myself in the content around the approach, but from what I know, that seems to match.
Yeah. Well, so I looked at a little bit of the material you sent about ISTDP, and one of the things, it seems like there's essentially 3 different categories of how the emotion shows up in the body. And I imagine that in addition to everything you do that maybe feels or looks like talk therapy, part of your training is to observe your client, or I don't know if you would call them clients or patient, but
I call them clients. Some people call them patients. Yeah.
But you're noticing their body in different ways. Is that part of what you're saying feels like there could be more to it, or?
Yes. There's multiple parts. So yes, we are observing the way that they are showing up with their body in the room. That is part of what we're assessing always. And that gives us indications of it gives us indications of the kind of defenses that might be in play. Defenses against emotional experience. It gives us an indication of the manner in which anxiety is being discharged at that time, which helps us diagnostically in a few different ways. So we are paying attention to the body, but linked to that, there's also a focus on when we look at the emotion in ISTDP, what makes the approach really different from other forms of psychotherapy is there's a real emphasis on the associated action impulse. So the emotion comes with obviously a motivation, of a movement kind of motivation, that an associated action that it wants to undertake, if we talk about it that way. And so when we dive into that part of things, there's also a focus on looking at signals that the client is giving us in the room with their body about when they're somewhat in contact with that action impulse, consciously enough that we can start to talk about it. So you might see people, as they're talking about being frustrated, starting to do fists, or whacking their hands, or these sorts of things. So we are also paying attention to that, and we're sort of linking that. So it seems to me that there is so much more emphasis on, yes, how they're showing up with their body for various reasons. And then it's sort of it's hard to know where to take this, because I have about 100 questions. So
Yeah.
And I'm trying to keep it more like a conversation rather than just like an interview. But I do have, I just have queries around when you're working with someone, I guess, even just from the basics. What is your approach in terms of when you meet someone? What are you assessing in the first instance?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and I think if you talk to colleagues of mine, you'd get different answers. The thing about the Feldenkrais method is it's such a vast universe, and there's kind of a joke that I don't know if it's a joke, but it feels true, but it's like almost preposterous to say. It's like what people will say sometimes about Feldenkrais method: it will help anyone do anything they want better. But like, that just feels like, really? Okay. So you have to know what it is, you want to work with, and how, I mean, one of the immediate thing comes up as I hear you talk about your work is that although there's definitely a relationship between practitioner and client, I think that typically Feldenkrais work is framed in terms of an individual is trying to have a better experience, and like I don't think that the relationship between practitioner and client is usually thought of as part of.
I see.
But I hesitate to say that. It's, if you had talked to me right out of my Feldenkrais training, I would have been talking differently. So I do a number of things now that so I work with someone, I would just begin with a conversation.
Okay.
And see what's going on with them. Now, if we're talking and the person keeps turning to the left, at a certain point, I'll just notice they keep turning to the left. And then if they ever turn to the right, I'll notice that too. But if they keep turning to the left, and I don't know, maybe they told me a story about something they were anxious about. So Feldenkrais could work with anxiety, but typically it works with, I have neck pain, my shoulder is stuck. It typically, we see people with physical symptoms to begin with, but people who've done a lot of Feldenkrais notice, it changes my emotional state. It changes the way I feel about myself.
Yes.
And Feldenkrais understood this from the beginning, but what he would say is, if we do talk therapy, I don't ever really know if you're actually telling me what's really going on, or I don't ever really know even if you want to be honest, if the words you're pronouncing really get to what you're saying. However, if I ask you to raise your arm up in the air, I can see if you do that, efficiently or not. And then that's a discussion about the mechanics of moving your body in space. But what he would say is, if we improve your movement, it's going to change your self-image. This is a phrase that he used. You know what? I actually grabbed one quotation that I thought would be nice to read to you, because it kind of bridges these things. I mean, I would say to you at this point that a Feldenkrais practitioner definitely could work with people around emotion. I did have a client not long ago who approached me and said, I have anger problems. And I said, okay. And all I knew was he's going to also have patterns in his body, which I can work with. And then we'll see how it impacts the anger. But let me just read this one.
Please do. I've got a couple of things here too that I've grabbed.
Yeah, so this is a quote from Feldenkrais, and what I like is it connects the two maybe sides of the story that are our two starting points. So he says, a fundamental change in the motor basis, in other words, the movement, the motor basis within any single integration pattern will break up the cohesion of the whole and thereby, let me start over. A fundamental change in the motor basis within any single integration pattern will break up the cohesion of the whole and thereby leave thought and feeling without anchorage in the patterns of their established routines.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
that's
then a second piece, in this condition, it is much easier to effect changes in thinking and feeling, for the muscular path through which thinking and feeling reach our awareness has changed and no longer expresses the patterns previously familiar to us. Yes. Habit has lost its chief support, that of the muscles, and has become more amenable to change.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful.
So, I mean, what's immediately clear to me is how to change the muscular patterns.
Yeah.
But I'm very well aware that that's going to shift other things. And for the clients who are talking to me about something that we'd more maybe categorize in the under emotion before physical, I'm still watching their body and how they, and so like a very typical thing is, I already mentioned it, turning side to side. Like they prefer to turn to one side. But one basic principle from Feldenkrais is if you're, in an ideal state with your body, with your being, you could turn in any direction just as easily, right? And so you tell me you have some emotional thing going on and I see you turn more easily to that side than the other. I might just help you turn easily to both sides, but I might engage you in a conversation about, the story you were telling me as we do it. Yes. But it's not necessarily, it has a little bit of a gap between the story and what we do. And so I think that the nice thing is we can also put the story aside and say, we're just going to work with the body for,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this disrupting patterns and habits is what I keep hearing over and over. That is exactly the same way that we would frame what we're doing from an ISTDP perspective, and that there are multiple entry points to do that. And this is what I'm hearing very much from you. It's your focus in the first instance is on the body, or on movement, I should say, rather than body, perhaps. Right. And just noticing, I guess the path of least resistance that is being engaged automatically, so, and then trying to see what happens when you play with adjusting that. Is that?
Yeah. So the path of least resistance is the starting point. So for example, again, if I think you turn easily to the left and not to the right, the first thing I'm going to do is turn you to the left. Yeah. We're going to work at what you already do well to get you into a state of, look, I'm good at this. Look, this is easy for me. Look, this is not provoking tension. And, if I turn to the left, when I come back to the middle, I'm turning to the right. So if, there's a way that we're already beginning. So like a session might look like this, and then eventually it looks like this, and eventually it looks right. Eventually we go to the new pattern. But what we might do is spend quite a lot of time reinforcing or improving the pattern that's already there. Another way of putting it, and it might be interesting then to sort of ask you to give a reflection, because from what I understand with you'll find a person has certain character defenses, like there's certain places they won't go, right? Yeah. So if we want to make an analogy, this person won't turn to the right, they'll turn to the left, right? I know you're categorizing it differently, but we've got what we could call habitual behavior and then non-habitual behavior, the thing maybe that they defend against doing, right? And so if we go over here, we're in the place where they do something well, but we're also gaining trust, right? Because if the first thing I do is turn the person in the direction they don't like to go, it's like, I don't like this guy. Like, the problem though is to really get the person involved, because, you know, especially in movement, people, there's a lot of beautiful massage therapists, chiropractors, etc. out there, but a lot of people who work with those kinds of therapists, they have this idea of, I want you to fix me.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, just work on me and fix me. Yeah. And
Right.
I will just lie here and
Right.
do nothing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can't, you know, and I'm sure that you could listen to one of your clients and sort of pick out their problems and say, look, just do this, 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 and this. And they might even say, oh, wow, that sounds so smart. That's what I should do. But it doesn't become embodied.
Yes.
You want to bring them into that place. So
Yes, and that actually brings me back to something I was thinking about as well, about the crossover. It sounds like your approach matches ISTDP in that the first real focus is on this deliberate, slow, sort of repeated experiential focus, I guess if we call it that. And the doing. It's a doing more so than, like you say, sitting down and cognitively or intellectually mapping out, here's what I think is going on, and sort of just talking through it. Actually, there's this focus on the doing and the doing, and through that, and actually I think with ISTDP as well, there is definitely the relational nature as well, the focus on the relationship. And through doing that over time, that is when the meaning making can then start to emerge, or then gets laid over the top, perhaps, if we talk about it like that, as opposed to the other way around. I think the idea being that if we sit and talk for some length of time, at great depth, about my neck, and we just talk about it, and we do, you know, and there's lots of theory involved. Eventually I'll get to a place where now I can go away. I know what to do to fix my neck, you know, like, and that's sort of it. Whereas I see both of these approaches as really the entry point is in the doing. It is very experiential in that manner. And that's actually, it might be different for you, because it sounds like people are coming to you already aware that there's going to be, well, that they're entering, it sounds, with a physical complaint. And so they're going to be aware that there's probably going to be movement that you're doing. Sometimes it can be tricky with my work, the idea that people come to therapy thinking that they're supposed to just sit there and just talk at length, right? And then they'll go away and they'll use that, whatever happened in that talking, to do something with their emotions or do something with their behavior, but that in the room it's just talking.
right.
And it can be quite difficult sometimes to get the clarity around why the experiential focus is so important in the room. And then we can do lots of the talking and the meaning making on the other side of it, perhaps. So that, yes. And then when you were just talking now about, character and the defenses, really, like you were talking about, there's habits, and then there are things that people just won't do. And do you see that? Do you have people that just say to you, no, I'm not going to turn my head that way? Or, like, would you have it that explicit?
Well, it's more like so there's two ways of working. One is like would look like a group movement class, and I would be speaking and saying, I would be guiding a sequence of movements.
Okay.
And we might do the movement to the left and do the movement to the right. And I don't know who in the class wants to go to the left or wants to go to the right. But the thing I would continually be saying is, notice your level of effort. Only go to the degree that it's, you know, comfortable for you. At the slightest, you know, point of tension, stop. But for some people, it's going to be really obvious. They can turn very far to one side and not to the other.
Right,
But
right.
what's really interesting in that context is Feldenkrais understood there is this whole dynamic. I feel like I made a mistake before saying that the relationship between the clients and the practice, I mean, it's actually very central in many ways. And in class, the thing that he noticed is people will come to a movement class and they tend to just, to put it crudely, obey the instructions of the teacher, right? So I could say, lift your arm up, but for some people who injured their shoulder, that would be a really bad idea,
Yes.
right? So,
Comply.
but this, yeah, And some people will think, if I'm going to heal this shoulder, I got to go to these classes and I'm just, and they're doing something. But not only is it physically painful, they're subjugating their agency to the authority of this movement teacher who they might have just met. I mean, literally,
Yes.
Anyway, so that's in any case, they might or might not. I mean, some people would say, I can't do that. I have an injury. Some people, most people with a big injury are not going to obviously do that. But there are people who've been recovering from an injury who have that idea, this is good for me, I just should do it.
Yeah.
But the idea is if we keep the nervous system in a state of calm, that's the state where learning happens. If we go into anxiety, we can't learn anything. But let's say I'm doing hands-on work with someone, because this is the other thing we do. In that case, there might be no dialogue, but the person might lie on the table and I might pick up their head and I might just do the tiniest movement to the left and the right. And if I go here and everything's fine, I might go here. But if I go here, I will feel them resisting the movement. I will probably, or often I would say, I will feel the resistance before they do. They don't realize it, but I can feel this body would rather go here than here. And so then what I'll do is I'll just keep going in the direction they want to go. So it's a dialogue in that sense. Feldenkrais often called the individual work a dance of two nervous systems.
Yes.
But, my own training of how I feel my own body when I work with a client, the idea is anytime that I feel like I'm forcing them, I stop.
Okay.
Because whether or not, their nervous system will begin to, brace or fight, or maybe they just go into some behavioral thing of like, I'm going to make nice, but I can't wait to get out of here, kind of thing. And none of that facilitates learning.
No. And the compliance bit is really important because we obviously come up against that as well. The people who want to be, the good client, and I will just do whatever you say and agree with whatever you suggest. And then it's not truly about them. Then it also becomes about the therapist, if that makes sense, because now the therapist is actually creating a story that the person is just accepting. And that's the opposite of what's helpful. The word resistance is really important that you keep coming back to, because that is, well, there's a key book by Ellen Abbas called Reaching Through Resistance, which is about ISTDP. And that essentially captures a lot of what we're doing. It is as a reaching through resistance. And the idea that the clinician is becoming aware of where that resistance is before usually the client would be the same. You can start to sense it straight away. And then you're saying to me that your approach is to actually keep going the way that is open to you, is not to start to press on the resistance, but to keep. And then very slowly, as you do that, you are very slowly making moves into the place that there was resistance, just over time.
Yeah, eventually we're going to get to there. And if we just do what's easy, if we just go to the place where there's no resistance for some time, what's likely to happen is that the nervous system relaxes. There may be more of a sense of trust. And a lot of, this is a place where, the psychology and the pain science, all of these things kind of comes together because if you have an injury, let's say you injure one of your legs, okay, well, you're going to limp and favor the other leg until it's healed. This is very smart, right? If you would just put all the weight on your injured leg, obviously that's no good. But if you, walk like this and you're always, stepping on the right leg for a long time, then when the left leg is healed, you still have a very strong habit of doing this, right? And then everything above your legs, like, your head is used to being over here. This shoulder does something because if you go over here, you would do a different thing, right? So all of these places get very used to, a certain thing. And the other thing I would say, and I'm sure you could relate to this, is one of the things that we have to tease out is the difference between familiar, unfamiliar, and comfortable, uncomfortable, right? So what's unfamiliar, we often just think, well, that's uncomfortable, but what's unfamiliar is often what I need to learn how to make familiar and eventually comfortable. And the fact that I feel that thing that's unfamiliar. So for example, with you know, I injured my left leg. If I start to do the thing that would take me over my left leg, which I don't want to do while it's injured, I just have an association with pain over here.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so even when honestly there's no reason to worry about being over the left leg anymore, I fear being over here. Right. And fear generally leads to bracing. Right. And then so if I just try to move this person's shoulder, but they're, you know, like this, so that's why we work with what's easy to the place where the person just feels like I'm not in danger because no one's asking me to say take my weight over my left leg. But eventually we will, but we don't want to go straight there, because if we do, then we're just, you know, we're just fighting with them.
Yeah, but it is trust building. I do think that that's an important part of what you're describing. So the relational part is really important, and spending that time to build trust.
Right.
I guess body to body, through showing that you're not going to just yank them over this side. And that careful trust building sets the stage then and relaxes. I mean, I understand it then relaxes them to the point that you can start to. Yes, that's really important too, because I think with ISTDP too, there's a lot of, especially from a theory point of view, there's a lot of focus on what you do once that bit's in place. And I think people can skip that, like the really being very careful at the front end and setting the stage and creating the relationship, the container in which you can start to work with resistance in a meaningful way is so important. Yeah. Yeah. You were talking about the bracing, and I was thinking about the way that we view sort of muscle tension as being as being a sign of one of the anxiety discharge pathways in operation, which would be sort of the type of anxiety that would indicate it's like the green light. It indicates that actually it's okay for us to press a little further, just to press a little further on if we're trying to access trapped or hidden feelings. Is the muscle tension, especially in the hands, the legs, the jaw, and we see that, that would be sort of considered a type of anxiety. How do you conceptualize anxiety in your work?
So Feldenkrais defined what he called the body pattern of anxiety. So you've already mentioned the jaw, right? Tension in the eyes, restriction in the throat, sucking in the belly, a kind of a caving in of the chest, right? Yes. There are things a body will do. And I mean, the way I would think of it is like I make myself small, right? But it's also like literally like if I'm a prey animal, right? And I think that I'm going to need to run. This is like literally getting ready to go, right? Yes. This is so, you know, fight or flight. But what we can do is look at literally the shape that the body makes. And then on the other hand, Feldenkrais identified or sort of outlined a series of principles of ideal movement. So let's imagine some gold medalist at the Olympics, you know, who just does incredible things. Well, how do they breathe? They always breathe simply, easily, right? So actually, my trainer, who worked with Feldenkrais directly and learned from him, said that the first time he had a individual session with Feldenkrais, where Feldenkrais was, you know, doing the hands-on, he said, you know, he was basically very anxious, young guy at the time. The whole time, Feldenkrais just went, like he just made an audible breath noise the whole time. It's like this. Like I've never used that particular thing. I mean, there's all kinds of stories about Feldenkrais who, you know, was just this inventive guy. But if we go back to this breath, like I can look at, someone's ribs and I can see where there's no movement when they breathe.
Yeah.
And I could go and work to help wake up that part of their ribs. And then maybe the person takes a fuller breath. And it's like, if we go back to the quote I read you, it's harder to feel anxious now that I can breathe, right?
Yeah.
Part of feeling anxious is breathe.
Mm.
Now, why do I feel anxious? What's the story? The Feldenkrais practitioner can't necessarily take that story out of your life or take that situation out of your life. But what they can do is help you have this big full breath. And then, if they're aware, if I'm aware of what's going on with the client, that's making them anxious, I can have a conversation where I say, okay, when you think of going back to work and talking to your boss, what would it be like if you could breathe from this place? And in fact, often, if let's say it was something like that, I get anxious when I go to work, we do some stuff, let's say it's body stuff, and now they're breathing well. And I'll say, what about going back to work? And often in that moment, the person will actually slightly collapse back into their habit. But then you can say, what did you just do? Right. And you can show them, and then you sort of maybe reiterate some of what you did in the session, feel the breath in all directions, feel those ribs that we worked with, remember how they can move and do that. And what if from this place you were to talk to your boss, what would that be like? And it's still up to them to go to work and have a new experience, but it's like you're starting to give them a felt sense in their body that I could stand in front of my boss in a different way.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. When you do that kind of thing, do you, is it ever the case that feelings sort of come out of the person that they might not know, they might not even have an understanding of why they're there, like that they just experience emotion quite intensely?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it can happen lots of different ways. The very first time I worked with someone, and like, I'm just hoping I don't, do something bad.
Yeah.
Like a volunteer came, and I worked with this woman, and I just sort of saw the way she was moving, and I tried a few things that I remembered. And at the end, she said she felt good. So I was like, great. And then she started talking to me about her relationship to her daughter. And I was just like, I have no idea where that came from, except to say, looking back, lying on the table. I mean, there's some parts of a session where the client might just sort of feel kind of blissed out, like this person's touching my foot and I'm just lying here. But then, again, if their spine feels longer, if they can breathe better, or if they feel like they can move in various directions and they don't have to tense because something, it's like if they happen to be thinking about some other situation in their life, they're now thinking through this more agile, comfortable body, that feels good to live in. And so that's how I would put it together. So sometimes I can't think of a bunch
that's
of,
okay.
but things do rise up to the surface that way.
Yeah, it's reminding me just of the idea of really what we're talking about is opening up possibility. Just reminding clients of the abundance of possibility available to them, whether that be movement or relational movement,
right,
and relationship to our own internal world, and our emotions and our thoughts, and because there's so much getting stuck and getting stifled that comes from these habits that you were describing. Also, that part that you were talking about earlier, that these habits obviously get formed at a particular point in time and in a particular place, which most of the time are no longer relevant. But like you say, I guess the felt sense of that isn't there. And so there is a fear that comes online to do something differently now. I learned at some point that it's important to do it this way. And maybe that knowledge now is stored even unconsciously. It's just automated. And everything inside me sort of seizes up at the idea of deviating from that plan and trusting that actually I could go back over to this place and try and do it this way, that was previously dangerous to me. I think that is matching very well here. Yeah. You were talking about with that woman when you were working on her, that perhaps she was also just thinking through something at the time, right? And
Yeah.
that could be part of why it also opened up different possibility of how she could be in that scenario while you're working on her body. There is I guess it's not even just ISTDP, I guess psychoanalytically, there is the idea of feelings being trapped, like this sort of like that they become unconscious and they're driving us unconsciously. A desire to avoid getting in touch with certain feelings is driving our behavior at some level.
Right.
And that when perhaps part of what is happening is that when you are working on someone's body and that they are coming into that more relaxed position, perhaps that is also bringing down some of the walls in that regard as well. And actually, there's greater ability for some of these things to pop through. Would be
Right.
my way of thinking
Right.
about. Yeah.
Well, the thing is too, so this woman, I don't remember any details of her relationship to her daughter, but if she had walked in and said, "This is what's going on with me and my daughter, can you help me?" and I tried, then she'd be thinking about it
That's right.
from like tracking moment by moment. But it's just like, okay, this person's touching my foot or they're moving my pelvis around. We might be quote unquote working on the relationship with her daughter, but it doesn't feel like it. It's just that the relationship with her daughter is in her body, so to speak. My trainer told a story once of this person who really had trouble turning their head to the left, right? And eventually what he noticed was something with this person's eyes, and he did a sort of very gentle thing with the eyes, and he succeeded in taking her head to the left. But as soon as that happened, this story came out, and the story was, when I was growing up, I used to see my father beat up my brother, and the memory was over there. It was like over there to the left, right? And so it was like, I don't want to look over there because there's something really bad over there. Now it's a memory, but it's very real. And like when that was happening, what was she doing? Or another story that a colleague told me was, she said she was visiting a friend of hers and it was a family dinner, and there was, again, it was a father and a son story. And she said every time the father spoke, he had this really loud voice, and the little boy would turn and go like this, right? Well, the father sits over here, right? And so keeps doing this. And what my colleague said is, I could see the scoliosis that was beginning, right? And so you could be totally healthy, but like, I mean, I know when I was growing up, my mother always sat to the right, my father always sat to the left. So after I heard the story, I used to think about, my relationship to my mother kind of lives here, and my relationship to my father kind of lives here. Not like that's a universal truth, but it's how it was every night for family dinner in my house, so we can access those things a little. And sometimes we don't even know it, but the person just says, gosh, I was feeling so much lighter emotionally after the session. Wasn't expecting that. I thought we were working on, my hip or whatever. So it's not like it always even comes out explicitly and we know, but that's potentially how it could, connect.
I think, I think especially if we think about resistance, actually turning up to work on your body as opposed to turning up to explicitly do therapy and talk about your emotions may already be helpful in that regard, in that it's catching the person off guard. They're not expecting it. And so all the defensive systems are not already activated. Like especially a first session for therapy, it's almost always the case, understandably so, that the client turns up and they're already, either highly anxious or highly defended or both. And it's already activated. And if you talk to them, it has been for days as they think about this appointment coming up, and what's going to happen there. I'm going to have to talk about these things. And it creates its own conflict because there's already a part of them that really wants to do those things because that's why they've signed up to therapy. And then there's just all this automatic stuff inside that says, we don't do that. which is part of the, part of the presenting issue. We don't do that. And so they're already in great conflict inside, even anticipating that first session. Whereas I think, if the entry point is I'm going somewhere to work on my neck, then they will be less likely to be going through all of that, at least consciously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have one client I've been working with for a long time, and she keeps coming because she just loves it, right? So sometimes she comes and I say, "How are you doing?" She says, "Great." And it's like, okay, well, now we can explore something. But the beautiful thing is our bodies are so complex that there's always something we can work on. There's always something we can learn. So it's like, how does the movement of your eyes relate to your hip joints? Well, maybe you never even thought about that. But if we can make a connection there, you can experience something new. I thought to show you something. If you interlace your fingers like this.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a familiar feeling, probably, right?
Yeah.
But notice that one of your thumbs is on top, is closer to your face.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
Okay, so if you switch them,
Oh my gosh.
put the other thumb closer to you, right?
Oh my gosh. That's not even right. I can't even do it. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you can do it, but you've probably never done it before.
No, that feels so weird.
It feels so weird, right? So, I mean, I haven't heard other Feldenkrais practitioners say this, but to me, this is like a small dose of anxiety.
Yes.
I don't feel like myself. I don't know. And yet, in terms of what I can do with my body, I can do this and I can do this. But one of them feels like me and one of them feels really odd, right?
Yes.
And if we were to keep playing with this, and I'm kind of exaggerating, but look at my wrists, right? Look at my forearms.
Yes.
This is two different positions of my shoulder blades. This is two different, sensations in my neck. And if you listen to your breath, sort of normal version, just take a breath or two. But then if you go to the other one, you might find that's weird. My breath is a little restricted, right?
Yeah.
Now we could say this is just a funny little trick, but what we could also say is if you could learn to have a full breath with your hands in this strange position, you are now more adaptable, right? So this is like, I mean, like, so we talked about gain the person's trust, do what's easy, but then we begin to, what I would say Feldenkrais does really well is we begin to tiptoe outside of the comfort zone.
Yeah.
So this is like a little bit of discomfort, but if you check in, is this painful? No, it's not painful, but like, you could do a bunch of movements like this and I might feel like, okay, this is pretty normal. But then if I switch the fingers and I make these movements, I realize, oh, this isn't just my fingers that feel different. And so now I'm giving fresh information to my spine. I'm giving fresh information. But the other thing is I'm giving fresh information to,
Yes.
the image of how my body works, because since I never do this funny position, it's as if it doesn't exist in my vocabulary.
Yes.
Like you ask me to play some virtuoso piece of music and I can't play it, so I can't even imagine it. The concert pianist, just, they can see it, they can hear it, they can feel it, because they've been there. So one of the things that we try to do here too is let's explore some safe but unknown territory. Let's just do a funny thing you've never done before. And even that refreshes, if we do it gently, it can wake up curiosity. And in a place of curiosity, eventually maybe I can face that thing that I tend to resist, because now I'm a curious person.
Yeah.
Right?
Playful.
So that's another kind of a route that you could go.
That's lovely.
Try this with one of your clients, just as
I'm going to. Yeah. And it's actually really nice, even just from an like an analogy point of view as well. I think sometimes talking about emotions, when there are periods where we're trying to do some sense of explaining what's happening and why, or what we might do and why, it can just all get very abstract somehow. It's quite difficult. People associate emotions really most of the time with actions. And it's the idea that we're not even talking about the action. We're just talking about some internal experience at this point. Using the body, just as an analogy, it would be really nice as well. But on top of that, it's all linked. I love as well as you talk about it as it's like a stacking. So the way that you talk about, well, sure, first of all, we're just really changing the position of the thumbs, but notice how that changes the wrist, and notice how that changes the arms, and then the neck, and then, everything.
Right. And I just said all that, but if we were working together, I might just invite you to do this slowly and talk to you, and then we might do this for 20 minutes. It really would be slow.
Yeah.
So, when we have a conversation like this, we get to the explanation. But the thing is, because if we just did this for a long time, at a certain point, like if you close your eyes, the position of your eyes actually changes too.
Yes.
But we could do this very slowly for a while, and then just eventually, what do you notice in your wrists? And then 5 minutes later, do you notice something in your shoulders? Or, and then when we get to the eyes or something like that, the person will notice it and they'll just go, my God, it changes my eye. It's like there's this kind of like, I can't believe it. And the other thing we're doing is we're noticing that all of myself is a system, right? That I'm not just, because if people have neck pain, their attention is about the size of their neck, right? And so we want to open that up.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just sort of wanted to put an extra pin in that. We're doing a lot of explaining here, but in a session, it might not get explained, or we might really drip out the explanation very slowly. It would more be like, hey, Aspasia, what do you feel in your eyes when you do this? What do you feel when you do this? And the first thing you might say is, well, I'm not sure. And I'll say, okay, let's just try it again. And give you like several tries. And if you say, I don't get it, then I might just say, oh, doesn't matter. Let's try another thing. Like, so we try to get into that mode of curiosity, but then when a person makes it their own discovery, it's like they feel that sense of insight.
Yes.
And that really, I think that helps them get to the place of, even though as a practitioner working with them, I play this large role, they can begin to discover, wow, I, through my own behavior and my own observation, can make a change in how I feel.
Yes. And some of what you're explaining there, I think, undoes the compliance. The coming at it from a more curious, playful position, and being willing to throw that exercise out, and we'll just do a different one if that one's not working for you. And rather than it feeling like an exam, and rather than being hyper aware if the other person's standing there waiting for the response from you, and is it the right response? And they're asking about my eyes, so I must be reporting that something's happening there, and like this whole because that is they're very hard to undo, obviously, in the therapy context, again, for the same reasons, because people are coming in ready to talk about that stuff that already activates defenses. The way that this provides insight into the system of the body, if we think about it like that, and the way that, what I'm doing with my finger has this ripple effect to everything, and my sense of perception, and the way that the rest of my body is organized in space, what's available to me for movement, what isn't. That is essentially really what we're doing, I think, too, in the kind of therapy I practice, in terms of trying to help people understand what they're doing in relationship with another person, and how that actually, the stacking effect that has across scenarios, and also their internal experience of other people and their beliefs about what's available to them with other people. The focus on were you going to say something?
Oh, well, I'm curious to know more. So if someone comes in and perhaps it's a particular relationship that they're wanting to work on, and they say to you, oh, me and my father, I always have this problem with my father. Like, what are some of the steps you would go through, or what are some of the things they would look for as they begin to talk about, a given relationship?
Yeah, well, it's so tricky, isn't it, to put this into nice plain language. So if someone came in and they were already aware that they wanted to work on a relationship with their father, I would say, first of all, that's quite rare. But that's not always. Like, I mean, I think maybe their spouse might be a bit more common, but what I mean by that is it's usually the case that people come in, at least more recently, and it's just, I feel anxious all the time and I don't like it.
Right, right. So it might be their father, but they need
yeah, actually linking it to yeah. But say they did come in and they said, I'm just arguing all the time with my partner and I just don't know what's going on and it's all very uncomfortable and I just want help. Then really what you're looking for is you're looking for the way that the person is so you want to inquire about what is their experience of their partner. Like you want to get very, very specific. People like to start to talk global. So you want to ask for a very specific instance to get very clear on what the issue is. And people will often locate the issue outside of themselves. So, when I ask my partner to do something and he never follows through on it, I keep trying to address it in different ways and ask him in different ways, and he never does the thing. And he's really defiant, or he just obviously doesn't care about me, or and so I don't know if I should stay with him or I should leave, or it becomes like an interpersonal conflict that they start to describe. And then you might look at whether that's a pattern as well. Like, is it just here with your husband or your partner? Is it elsewhere? And you get a sense of whether it's specific or it's more global. But then you want to understand what is happening for the person on the inside. So the way that we work is we're looking for the intra-psychic conflict. What is the component that I can actually work on with this person? I don't have their partner in the room. We're not doing couples therapy in this context. The way that they're communicating, I can't do anything about. I'm only hearing their report about what happens. What is the real issue inside this person that they are coming to me to help them make a decision about what to do, rather than just having access to some sense of, here's what I'm going to do in the situation, and then go through with it. Right? Why are they so confused that they're sort of seeking this outside guidance? And generally that's because there's something happening inside them that's very uncomfortable that they are avoiding. And so one of the ways they avoid it is through focusing on interpersonal conflict, as opposed to noticing what happens inside them. So what I mean by that is it might actually be the case that, okay, so what happens when your partner doesn't do the thing, or you ask your partner to do something and they say to you, no, they can't do it. Mm-hmm. What happens inside you? Like trying to slow it down and help them realize that they're having some reaction to that inside. And then what do you do? And they might say, well, I yell and I scream, or they might say, well, then it's just hopeless and I just have to accept that they can't do it. And so now I have to pick up the slack and I have to do it, right? Which would be more like becoming passive. Or I start to feel badly about myself because I'm clearly not a good partner, right? So then that's like self-attacking. So I'm trying to get a sense of how able is this person to reflect on what happens inside them, report that to me. How does that link to what they're describing about the behavior that goes on between the two people in this particular relationship? And so it really depends where they form at. Some of the work is about, first of all, trying to help them understand that something happens inside them that's very conflictual, that leads them to behave in a certain way to get away from that feeling, which can actually close down the range of possibilities available to them.
Right.
Does this make sense?
Yeah, I mean, so as I said in the beginning, I don't typically think of Feldenkrais work as, like we don't do couples work.
Yeah.
But, and actually in my own history, like I solved, let's say, a lot of problems in my life with the Feldenkrais method. Yeah. I didn't solve my social anxiety. And what I discovered was I could do all of the Feldenkrais I want and make my body feel, really good. But then if I go into these social situations, so I got involved with circling, which you may be familiar with to some degree. And, but when I started learning circling, which of course is interpersonal, and it might take up, relationship or whatever is going on. Because I had Feldenkrais training, one of the things that I started noticing, because what we're always talking about in the Feldenkrais method is how much effort is being used, and can we reduce the amount of effort? So these days, when I think of relationship, I think, well, what is really effortful? Well, trying to make the other person's behavior change. That's actually impossible, right?
Yes.
People try to do that. And so when you say,
Yes.
how do you feel? Just to bring their attention to the thing that they can actually affect change, which is their own behavior. You're not doing the Feldenkrais method, but you are doing something in that moment that to me is very consonant with how I understand things based on the Feldenkrais method, because you may or may not talk in terms of effort, but it's like, we need to get to a place where we're not working on something that's impossible. And because if it is, if I'm hoping that you're going to help me get my partner to change, like,
That's it.
feels, and it probably feels impossible to you too, as the therapist. So then we're just like, then I'm asking you for something that you can't help me with. And I thought you were a pro, and like, gosh, no one can help me, not even this professional,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a lot of it is trying to help a person better understand the true motivations behind their behavior. It can just seem like such a given. And I mean, of course, this happens for me as well. It can seem like such a given that, the reason I feel, for example, terribly about myself, and I'm feeling depressed, and I have a low self-esteem, or I'm giving myself a hard time, is because, my partner treats me in a certain way, or my partner refuses to do something I ask him to do that's important to me. That must mean I'm, a bad person. I'm asking too much. It can just seem like a given. Whereas when you really break down a situation like that, for the person who might just accept their partner saying no to them about something that matters to them, and then therefore having to go away and figure out their own way of, and never bringing it up again. Once we really break it down and look at it, we might come to find that what happens very quickly is that when their partner looks at them and says, no, I won't do that, it sparks anger inside. They feel very angry for maybe a brief second. Maybe they're not even aware of it, but unconsciously it starts to activate anger. And they have learned early in life that anger in a relationship with a man who I love is never helpful, never acceptable, goes very badly if that ever comes up and out, only disconnects and destroys a relationship. So their psyche, their body has learned to keep that underground. And so it does that in a variety of ways. That stacking thing I was talking about again. There is an anxiety that starts to get activated. That's usually what people become aware of rather than the feeling of anger. They just start to feel like maybe a bit of that tension. And then the defenses come online. Now, the defenses are a whole range of behavioral stuff that is just automatically comes online to try and keep the anxiety at bay. And the anxiety is actually part of keeping the feeling at bay as well. So it's all very quick, but part of the defense in this example might be, I attack myself. I notice, I've asked too much, and then I go small and meek and passive and quiet, and don't bring it up again. And over time, that I might create a story in my head that I'm a bad person, I asked too much, or I might just start to create a story in my head that I can't rely on my partner. The times where I do ask him, he'll never do anything. But again, if you break it down, you might come to see that the person only asks their partner to do something like, I don't know, could be infrequent. They never go back and sort of say, well, actually, it's really important to me. They don't provide additional context. They're closing down the possibility of their partner actually understanding that something matters to them. There's all these automatic moves we make behaviorally that reinforce stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, other people we're in relationship with. But ultimately, underneath, it's like an attachment motivation at play often too. So it's a way to try and preserve relationships in some manner in the midst of what can look like to the psyche, at least, like an emotional threat. It's threatening to feel anger towards either a man I love or a person I love or whatever the context, or an authority figure. And so rather than even consciously experience it, my body might tense momentarily, and then I do this defensive maneuver that helps me get away from the anxiety, get away from the feeling. And that's actually what's motivating the behavior. It helps me get away from it. The minute that I get up and leave, or, the minute that I decide I'm going to ghost this person and never talk to them again, I get away from ever having to experience that feeling with them again. So it's sort of more about that. And so the idea with, and it's very hard to give examples because it can go all sorts of ways, but as an example, yeah.
When you said that it's hard to explain this stuff,
Yeah.
it just occurs to me that, you have your training and you've worked with a lot of clients. And I imagine that even though you can explain to me why you did a certain thing with a certain client, I imagine you're improvising in the moment and you're feeling things. And there's a way that you've seen what a person looks like who's dysregulated, even though you've never seen this particular type of dysregulation. But I imagine that our training,
Yes.
it sets us up for a certain kind of awareness that the client might not have, that we try to lend to them in a certain way. And of course, we also make mistakes and we learn from those things too, right? I've been talking a lot about how I build trust, or I, make sure, but I have gone too quickly and broken trust. I've done those kinds of things, and you learn to do that. And I think, I don't know to what degree ISTDP is sort of accepted in the mainstream or not, or if it's kind of, well, in any case, Feldenkrais is a little off to the side as well. But the difficulty is that, humans are complex, life is complex, and like, it's beautiful if you can have a protocol that works. But I think most protocols, even the best ones, they're really frameworks. And, there's like maybe 60% of the protocol that matches this person, but then there's this 40% wild card that you have to have some kind of facility with, but I imagine you can feel, oh, this person's turning back into themselves. They're turning away from what they need to do. Or, oh, I can sense them opening up. I can sense them getting curious. I can sense their willingness. In fact, I remember there was something in the material you sent me about, which was really interesting. There's something about tracking almost like your client's willingness to learn at different stages. Is that right?
Yeah. Like how their will. Yes, their will to work on something. Yes.
Yeah.
That has to be engaged and it has to be online. And so there's about 20 things in ISTDP you're constantly trying to track, which is what makes it tricky. But yes, that is what you're tracking. Because without their conscious will online, you will step into the shoes of becoming, well, all sorts of things, but it could be another demanding figure in their life, another someone who is compelling them to do something. It does go back to the trust thing we were talking about. You do have to track their will. And so a lot of what you're doing is you are, especially for certain types of clients, you are purposely holding back at certain junctures when because their will is not online, and you are sort of challenging them to that and letting them know. Because it has to be, I think actually, no, this is true of all clients. The autonomy piece is vital. And there is no point going through a therapy and having someone force you through a set of exercises where on the other side of it, you can look back and go, well, I didn't really do that. Like, it's so important to have the agency piece online. But also, I think even just at a more fundamental level, there's only, in terms of what we're trying to do, there's only so much progress you're ever going to make if someone's resistance is still in play. And so if their will is not online, that can be a kind of resistance that's in play. It's a resistance against the other person often. This is what, and this might link back to what you were saying as well about social anxiety, and noticing that was still an area for you that was difficult despite all this other stuff that you were doing with Feldenkrais, is that there is there's the defensiveness and the resistance that we build up inside ourselves against even looking at our own stuff. And then there is how much we're then willing to open up and share with another person. There's that next step. So we are also assessing that, how much access does the person currently have inside themselves to know, well, actually, I do feel anger in that moment, momentarily, for example, before it turns into self-attack. I do notice feeling angry, and it is at him. And then the next step is, and how much are they going to be able or willing to tell me that? I don't ever want anyone to see that about me, though, because they would judge me as a bad person. So even my therapist, I'm not going to tell them that. I'm just going to continue to sit here and say, no, I just noticed feeling really badly about myself. No, there's no anger towards him, right? And so it's actually trying to figure out when that's happening, very subtly, how much of that is do we think is tactical? It's just keeping me at an arm's length from them, and how much is
like. Do you have an almost somatic sense in your body when your client is sort of, for lack of a better word, telling you the truth or not?
Yeah, yes, there are definitely, the more I tune into my body, I have to. I think when I'm tuned into my body and I'm taking what I'm feeling in my body seriously, and also it's also in my mind. So it's also even being attuned to just hearing almost like little whispers. Like sometimes words just come into my mind. More so, it's happening more so now, I think, as I'm getting more and more into the approach. Just like a sense of something that I could say that's going to help this person in this moment unlock something. And then if I pay enough attention to that and I sort of say it, generally, it's helpful. But also, yes, in my body. A lot of this is paying attention to, as therapists, to what we're feeling in the moment as well.
Right.
Where and how tense am I? And do I notice all of a sudden I'm clenching, or I'm I think it does differ from client to client. There have been clients where I thought that I was tracking that well, and then I've come to realize that, I was getting that so wrong. I was getting that so right. And even the reflection on that and why that occurred that way and what that tells me about me is really important. So it's very reflective. To do it well, you have to constantly be reflecting on what you're doing. And we video our sessions. So it's also watching them back, and you are paying attention to the client's body a lot as you watch it back.
Right. So have you ever had a session where, let's use your example, I'm angry with my partner, except actually I don't want to be angry at my partner because it might drive her away, and then I don't have a partner, I'm alone. But I'm working with you, and at a certain point I sort of say, you know what, but I really am angry. It's not right. And like I start to express the thing that I wasn't willing to express. Like, I don't know, can you walk me through something like that? What it might feel like for you, or some of the things you might notice when someone actually sort of crosses that bridge, because I assume they wouldn't come to you if that doesn't happen.
We hope. Hope it happens.
Right. I'm sure not everyone gets there, and I'm sure it's not for a lack of they really have to be a part of it, but some people do that, and I wonder how, because I'm sure that's the thing you're looking for, and when you're watching the tape back, it's like, okay, that's the thing, right? There's certain.
You mean what I'm looking for to differentiate whether, when they're saying that, they're actually in touch with the feeling and reporting something honestly versus compliance, or you're just genuinely curious about what happens next in terms of once they start to get in touch with the feeling?
Part of what I'm asking is, it sounds like you've got a lot of ways of mapping out the defenses, right? I don't know if you would use the word the pathologies, but then what does well-being look like? What happens when someone has a breakthrough? And I mean, again, this is going to be somewhat individual, but are there certain markers, or, like for you, your own experience in the room of the person who's now doing that which they were previously afraid?
What is I can understand sort of the desired outcome.
Yeah, sure.
So there's a few things. So one way I would talk about that is ultimately what can be transformational, if we use that word, is for people to get to a point where they are able to hold what we call complex mixed feelings about someone who they're in a relationship with. They can hold both those things together at once without having to choose one feeling or the other. So what I mean by that is love and anger is a great one. I can love you deeply, and I can notice in this moment a desire inside to rip your head off, right? Like just like both things.
Right.
I would never do that in real life with my actions, right? So it's also then it's the differentiating, noticing it inside to its fullest extent, but without fear that that is going to take over your actions. And having available to you, being able, trusting that I can notice both those things inside me at once. I can feel them both at once, and I know that I have conscious control over what I choose to do with my actions, though. Yeah. So I can let you know those things, but also, of course, I love you. I'm never going to do that. However, that might be a signal that, you know, what you did hurt my feelings, right? So can we maybe work on that? But it comes from a place of connection and care. You bring it up because you want to remain in contact with this person and build together. So I'm going sideways. So that sort of like the markers of progress would be that a person is able to notice, say, two feelings at once inside them, if we call it that. Hold them together. It's like an integrated, what we call integration. Hold them together and just be with them, there with me. And this often happens with the therapist. So it often gets to a place where they're experiencing these feelings towards me.
Right.
Yeah, plays out in the therapy relationship because I'm just another person, and I'm often seen for whatever reason as an authority figure or like another woman in my life, like my mother, or like, you know, it plays out in all sorts of ways.
I love you because you're helping me, but I hate you because you keep making me confront this uncomfortable
That's
shit.
it. Even just being the person who is pressuring to look at things we don't want to look at. Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
So noticing both those things. And being able to just have it there and sort of experience, you want to help. So again, it depends where the person lies. For some people, it also involves that they can now feel feelings in their body. It's not just a cognitive thing. I'm angry. Oh, I feel the heat. I understand what this feeling means. This is a signal of anger in my body. I can also be aware of that doesn't cut me off from access to my love towards this person as well. Because that's often what happens then, right? They're splitting. You know, when people come in and they're like, oh, no, I hate him. I hate him. It's like the hating is usually a sign that you only got access to one feeling, and that's completely cutting off access to the other. And that's often where people might do things like, leaves, you know, like all sorts of things, hurt people. And then later on, the love comes creeping back in, and now they feel just, you know, guilty and shameful and about all their actions that they did when they were overcome by one anger. So there's holding complex mixed feelings. There's helping a person understand that a feeling can happen inside us, that it has feeling in the body. It has an associated action impulse. That's really helpful for people. So, for example, guilt is a good one for that. People often struggle with guilt. Feels like a really useless emotion. You know, linking that to, well, if you can get very specific about the instance or the action for which you're feeling the guilt, it actually opens us up to the ability to reach out and repair. Not always, right? But, you know, so that's the action impulse for guilt would be reach out and repair. The action impulse with anger is it can often be violent or aggressive. It doesn't mean that we do that thing, but we think about it as being just primarily wired into us. And so instead, what might that be telling me? It might be telling me to stand up for myself, to stand up, to have, you know, some authority, some assertiveness. Because for a lot of people, they slump and they go passive instead, and then the attack goes on themselves. And this is often, you know, depression and actually all those things you're saying to yourself, that way that you are diminishing and hurting yourself, if we turn that outwards towards this person over here, and you imagine saying those things to them, might that actually be the direction of the feeling rather than having to put it on yourself? But imaginal doesn't mean that you need to go and say those things.
Yeah. So you just said several things that, again, you're describing work that's different than mine, but what I'm hearing is the same principles that I work. So like to just love and hate my partner at the same time, except it's really uncomfortable and I don't want to deal with it. It's kind of like a blob, right? Like there's not a lot of, I don't have the detail. And later when I'm saying, it's true that I love them, it's true that I'm angry and I'm angry about this, what we could say is we've differentiated a lot more. Or another way we could describe it, like this is very, it could be very practical in terms of the body and space, but I mentioned this idea of the self-image before. And something I might do with a person is, you know, if like my client today, she's recently injured her hand, right? And this actually isn't exactly what I did with her today, but one of the things I could do is just like help her feel each finger. Like I could just really like, it's not a hand, it's got 5 fingers and it's got all these joints and we can help them all out. And just because she feels more, different options come. And then when you said, you know, oh, you could blame yourself and attack yourself, but what if that same feeling was turned in another direction? It's like you're taking the pattern and you're doing a variation. And you're not necessarily even saying, well, you should go say that to this person, but if you do that, that's different than what you are doing. So let's try on something different, you know? And so you're shaking up the pattern, you're creating a variation. Yeah, there was, and this is the other thing. I think you'll find this interesting. So another big piece, and I think you used the phrase the imaginal, right?
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have that word imaginal until I encountered John Vervaeke's work, and I know we've both had a conversation with him, but I hadn't encountered the word, but I was already very much through the Feldenkrais method working with imagination, because I mentioned already the self-image. And like one of the things that could happen in, let's say, one of the movement classes is I would start by having people lie on the floor and I would do a kind of a body scan. A lot of people are familiar with body scans, but in a Feldenkrais class, it could be very specific. It could be, notice how this heel touches the ground. Notice how that heel touches the ground. Do you notice that one of your heels is a little more to the inside or one is more to the outside? And then let's say the first 10 minutes of the class, I ask the person to do movements with the right side of their body. Never ask them to do anything with the left side of the body. Then I'll say, scan your body again, and they'll realize the right side feels totally different.
Right.
The right leg could feel longer than the left. And that could have felt like the same length 5 minutes ago. And then we do certain images. So that's one level of images that we keep going back to the self-image. But then let's say I ask the person, put your hand on your head. And we kind of repeat the action. So then we add more detail. Feel your hand touching your head, but feel your head touching your hand. Think about your pinky as you do it. Oh, think about your thumb. What's the weight? Like, are you compressing your spine or do you reach up? All these details, and we make it really rich. And then we sort of pause, and then I'll say, okay, now can you imagine putting your hand on your head? And what do you think you would feel in your spine? And what do you think you would feel, you know, imagine that you're paying attention to your thumb as you put it in. So it's the same process, and we've maybe done it in actual movements so that they had some, but then what we're doing is we're trying to flesh out a really detailed image.
Yes.
The idea is that every action I take begins with an image. Like you and I are talking and it's pretty quick, but there's a way that I hear these words before I say them.
Yes.
Or if I go, you know, walk out the front door, it's a long time since I had to learn how to walk, but there is a little map of one foot going in front of the other in my head, right? But, you know, if I have an injury, the map might be like, I can barely see what my left leg does because that was the injured leg. And then I see my right. And so we work in the image. And typically when someone's movement gets a lot better, or I would imagine in your case, when their relationship or their self-understanding or their action in the world gets better, we could also say the internal image is clear. So in a sense,
yeah,
that's how I see another parallel between what you're doing and what I'm doing, because there's a sense of that there's always an there's always an image that precedes the action.
Yes.
Right. So it's like we can almost feel, if you ask me to tell my partner I'm angry at her, you've already produced an image in me.
Yes. Yes.
And I might be comfortable with that image or not. And so we can work with that image. And then if the image gets comfortable to me, maybe I can actually take an action I've never taken before.
Yeah. And it's that image. It's exactly that image, which is what I call the action impulse. It's the visualization of what that would be in your mind's eye. It's that many people are defended against experiencing. So that's part of what they're avoiding by taking particular moves in a relationship or in the world, is that they are defending against it, consciously seeing it or experiencing even the image before they even get to the step of noticing, oh, I could have an image and then I could decide actually what I want to do. So they don't even want to see the image. And this is, I mean, you think about anger it's a great example for that reason as well. Often the images that might come with a very primal surge of anger are terrifying. People don't want to look at that. They don't want to see that inside themselves. They don't want to notice that there's, an animalistic part of them, if needed, that could act in a certain way or might have a motivation to act in a certain way. And so it gets shut down, and access to even seeing that image gets blocked. And then so some of the work is actually just opening them up to that idea that yes, that in spending more time trying to have access to this feeling inside, what do you notice coming up in your mind's eye? Not in real life, but in your mind's eye, if this feeling was just completely in charge, what would that look like? How would that go in terms of just imagery? And the reason you do that, this goes back to you asking about the desired outcome, is that part of what ISTDP is doing is helping people connect back into that, but through doing it in a particular way and starting to really let oneself have that imaginal experience of these whatever the feelings are that have been very trapped and suffocated over a long period of time. On the other side of that, what can happen if it's done in particular conditions is it actually gives rise, it opens something up inside. It's the way I've talked about it before is like a hook. Having this full experience of a feeling that has been monsterized inside ourselves for a long time. Once we really feel it activating our body, watching it play out in our mind's eye, it pulls up all the associated memories. So it's a little bit like you were talking about noticing, oh, my father sat over there and my mother sat over there. It helps a person, all of a sudden, relevant memories come to the surface. This is where the link can sometimes be made to between, oh, this anger I'm feeling here, like that we're really looking at with you, my therapist, or with my husband. Now I see how that's also leftover anger I had towards my mum or my dad, and it's been stifled down. So there's an extra intensity to the feeling that I've been battling against. That's not even about my partner. It's not even about the therapist. It's actually about this person from my past. And so now that comes up, now we have an opportunity to look at that, process that, put it in its place. So that one way of thinking about it is like clearing up your perceptual screen. Now I can get rid of some of that stuff that is not even about me when I look at Seth or me when I look at my therapist. It was the grimy windscreen I was looking through that was actually leftover stuff about another relationship. So it actually opens a person up to be in relationship more clearly with current day people, and to meet each circumstance based on each circumstance, is one way of thinking about it. So that is part of the sort of the outcome that you're looking for is, I can notice now when I'm in interaction with my partner and they do something I don't like, I still notice that anger inside, while also being able to hold on to the love for them. I feel I can reflect on those things and choose what I want to do with my actions in a more balanced way. And also I'm aware that on some level, this is activating, stuff about my mom or stuff about my dad. And I can be aware at the same time that he is not my dad, right? Like I can also differentiate that now in my mind's eye. Some of this feeling is also, I hate it when people do something like this to me because it reminds me of that thing. But also this is this individual. It's not my dad and the entirety of what my dad was and how he was to me. This is a different individual who might be doing this one behavior, but it's in amongst a whole other set of possibilities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, and it sounds like you're describing what could literally be a moment in time, but that followed maybe 5 therapy sessions that
Yeah.
took to map it all out. But once I've mapped it, then I have, and that's the other thing that I would draw as a parallel. Like what's the ultimate result? It's choice.
Yes.
And the person still has to be skillful,
Yes.
but it's harder to be skillful when I don't see, that there's 5 options here. Like one of Feldenkrais was sort of famous for having these aphorisms. One of them was, if you don't have at least 3 choices, it's not a human choice. Like yes versus no, it's not a choice yet. You're still, and
Yes.
so, and what I'll often say to people is a lot of things look like yes or no, but there's many versions of yes and there's many versions of no. But, and I've experienced this plenty of times where it just
Yeah.
feels like there's only 2 options and they're both terrible. And then how do I feel? I feel totally, impotent and I can't do anything. And I'm
Yes.
very weak and like, probably I can't do anything right, and it's just because I can't see.
Right.
And the thing is, the third option, it could appear not to be the answer, but it's just it's a new point of investigation. It's like if I can ask a new question, then we can start the process over again. If I can ask a new question that presents me 3 options,
Yes.
Anyway, I don't.
Yes. No, that's wonderful. No, that's wonderful. And actually that is, I would say, again, depends on the presentation, but that's also a desired outcome, I guess, of this kind of therapy is helping, or maybe it's not the outcome, but along the way, it's to help the person see that oftentimes it feels like we're backed into a corner.
Right.
And like you said, there's nothing else we can do. It's this or that. And but it's and oftentimes it's because I'm in certain kinds of relationships, and it's helping the person to see their own role, the sort of self-perpetuating suffering that goes on. And that is obviously something that needs to be done gently, because there can be a shaming quality to that if it's not done in a particular way. But it is important to help to take the blinders off in that regard, that actually this is not just you finding yourself in situation after situation where people are treating you poorly, but perhaps there's something you're doing, there's a way you're contributing to this that perpetuates a kind of suffering where you feel you are stuck in a corner. And I think that is what you're talking about, opening up more options in front of someone.
Right.
And what I keep hearing over and over as you talk is just this real focus on fine-grained analysis, like getting very fine-grained, like really tuning into, even as you talk about, it's not just a hand, but it's fingers, and it's even on a finger, you could break that down.
Interesting, because I worked with some trainers who, let's just say, other trainers thought they got too specific, thought they went overboard, right? Like, so you can practice the Feldenkrais method and know a ton of anatomy and all the muscles and all of these things, or you could not. You could just get so used to moving and seeing what comfortable movement feels like or looks like, because we practice the movements in our own bodies. But the thing about going more fine-grained is, like, it usually is for someone who doesn't think about their movement. I mean, if I work with an athlete or a dancer, that's very different, right? Although often the athlete or the dancer is going to have, I must perform, I must be perfect. They're going to have all this psychological stuff that shows up in the movement, but they're also pretty sure they know what they're doing and they've mapped their body. But for your average person, if I ask them to turn their head, I could just say, notice your nose, notice your left ear, notice your right ear, notice the back of your head, notice your chin. And every time they change the point of attention on their head, it feels different. And it's almost arbitrary sometimes, this fine-grained detail, except it takes them out of their habits.
Right.
So it's not necessarily that we always go specific. I mean, because one of the principles we're looking for is actually to get the person to feel that everything they do is done with the whole self, not with their arm, their neck, their shoulder, But what's interesting is some of the processes we use do go very into detail, like another one that's called the bell hand, and you do this. It's kind of similar to this thing, but if you keep doing it, and you go slowly, you can start to feel this in the soles of your feet. You can start to feel this everywhere. I don't expect you to feel it.
No, I understand what you mean.
Yeah. And so in the end, it's like, what's this movement for? Well, it's just for feeling things you haven't felt. And we might do this one movement. We might not even go to the other side. So in that sense, it seems like there's a lot of focus on the hand. But the more that I pay attention to my hand and the more that I get into this simple thing, the more I notice that it's reverberating.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm just giving you a couple of things that specificity can be connected. But I also remember I had one of my trainers also talked about, because there's people who have very little awareness, and he said, okay, well, with some clients, what you do is you have them stand, and then you bring over a chair and you have them put their foot on the chair, and then you say, can you feel that your knee is bent? And then you have them take their foot off the chair, like it's straight. And then like they might say, of course I can feel that, and you say, okay, great. And then you build from there. But you sometimes you start with the most unbelievably obvious thing.
Yes.
Because they're funny. There's a lot of my clients who really get confused. They're full-grown adults, but they're really confused about right and left.
Yes.
Right. And that's just deeply in them. And it's like, this would be trivial for anyone else, but for this person, this is really vital. Let's work on this, so.
Yeah, no, that's, well, first of all, I hear, in what you're saying, I hear how it is both. So actually it's part of what is going on here, it seems like, is it's the movement between getting very specific and coming back out and remembering. It's like, and it's the kind of in and out, which I always associate with breathing. Which I think definitely links to the kind of therapy I do. But what you were saying there about needing to meet the person where they are, and sometimes you have to start with those very, I guess, are they grand or they're very basic kind of distinctions. It's the same. So there's so many people I see, they can't report feelings cognitively in their body, and it's all confusing to them. They're so intellectual. And so they report thoughts as feelings. I see this everywhere actually at the moment. Seems like a real confusion. What did you feel in that moment? Oh, well, I felt, it's not fair and they're just taking advantage of me. Yeah, but what was the feeling? And they just look at you blankly. Well, that it was unfair and that the person were, you're like, okay. But so, for some people, we start, I guess the analogy that matches what you're talking about, we would just start with, well, did you like it or you didn't like it? Like you just start, and that's how you start. You're actually building up. You're building up the specificity over time, and the vocabulary that goes with it. Some of the, obviously a verbal vocabulary, but also the matching that with, I guess, that fine-grained distinction in their body. Oh, there is a slightly different quality to what I feel in my chest for grief versus anxiety. Or starting to be able to notice differences, and how that information can be really useful. It's just another data point to take into consideration when it comes to how we're going to behave. It doesn't have to indicate what you're going to do, but it's another data point that might tell you something that at a conscious level you're not yet aware of. So it's often the case that people might report, for example, feeling angry, and they've got no conscious reason. But why would I feel angry at him? I don't know why. But to notice the anger there might tell you something important if you stop and we think about what's happening here and sift through it. Well, actually, maybe there is a desire in me to assert myself a little more in this scenario. Maybe that's what it's helping me to see. So yes, I think it's interesting how different the starting point can be with each client. I keep going back to when you were talking about, sort of the desired outcome. I'm sure there's things that I'm missing in terms of where we're trying to get, but I think you summed it up really nicely when you talked about, ultimately it's about increasing a person's sense of choice and agency. that,
Yeah.
that they can make decisions in really difficult circumstances, that there are more options available to them than they might see, that
Right.
they are able to tolerate really really intense, previously challenging internal experiences, rather than lots of behavior that's going on that is in an attempt to avoid feeling something inside, but that behavior gives rise to a different kind of suffering, and a different kind of narrowing in terms of possibility. And so coming back to, once I learn that I can be in my body and have these feelings, that helps the person to exactly be clearer on how they want to act in the world, feel that they have more capacity to make those decisions, from an integrated, thoughtful, mindful place.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. There was something about the imagination that I wrote a little note about. I just want to see. I think it was something from the blog post you sent me.
Mm, mm.
Mm.
Well, just
Yeah.
to tag on a little to what you were just saying about outcomes, and this may be the case in your work as well, but I think something that Feldenkrais did that was really important is and I mentioned this before, he defined principles of ideal movement. And, for him, he said movement is life. Life is a process. Improve the process and improve life itself. So he saw movement as being so much more than movement. But, in ideal movement, the spine is lengthening.
Right.
Now, that sounds pretty technical, but I can watch a person, and if they lean to the side, but they collapse, right? That could be improved. If they lean to the side, but they're lengthening one side of the spine and the other, right? So maybe no one gets to that point, but we can always look for how would this movement happen if the spine was lengthening?
Yes.
Or another principle is ideal movement is reversible. Now that's one that is it's more like in the learning, like if I jump out the window, that's not reversible. If I jump up, I'm gonna, but
Right.
in a learning context, if I'm rolling on the floor left and right, and you watch me and I roll and then I kind of go, that wasn't reversible. But if it's reversible, I could stop and change directions at any time. And we'll do that. We'll work on rolling and we'll do all of this kind of thing. But then Feldenkrais would say, but if you're really, he talked about, one of his books is called The Potent Self. Like when you're potent,
That's cool.
your emotions are reversible. Like you say something and I get really mad at you, and then suddenly you explain and I realize I misunderstood, and I can just drop that. Right? That would be like an emotional reversibility. And of course that might not even be realistic. Maybe that feels like too much, but that would be an ideal, right? So can I get closer to that? Maybe I can cool off in 2 minutes instead of 5 minutes, like that would be closer to that kind of reversibility.
Yeah, I like that. The Potent Self. That's a great title.
Yeah, I mean, he's written several books. There's one that one of his sort of famous ones is just called Awareness Through Movement, which is also what the class is called if you teach a group class. And I actually read it aloud on my YouTube channel, and I did a commentary on each chapter. And what's really interesting, I mean, if we talk again, this is something we could get to. We didn't sort of get to what's going on out there in the world that brings people through our tour, but I'll just give you this broad statement. But one of the things he points to is like how a lot of what makes a person miserable is just the individual relating to society, right? I need to fit in. I need to earn a certain amount of money. I, need to appear a certain way. These are the reasons that we, tie ourselves into knots. And he talked about, we wear a mask, and he has this devastating line about the person who's lives a very happy mask life until they stop and notice that they can't feel their heart, and it's like, but it's like we recognize that, right?
That's what it's like. Yeah. I was going to say that's actually, a perfect way of describing why a lot of people are coming to see me. It would be something like that. It's just I can't, they can't really put it into words, but there's some sense that whatever they've been doing, that they've been just keeping it all together and doing what they need to do, and everything is working. it's all just starting to, something's wrong. Something's
Right.
wrong. Yeah. Like they've lost themselves, or things are starting to fall apart. That was a really beautiful way of putting it.
Well, and I've been immersed in talking to you, and I only just now made the connection. Of course, you talked to John Vervaeke along with Terry Dentry, and what they're doing is essentially saying, let's connect these individual people who are having these, problems in their lives with the big picture, and they're totally together. I mean, one of the ways that I think I said this to John, because he talks about the meaning crisis, and one of the things I'll say is part of the meaning crisis is that everyone sits in chairs.
Yeah.
Like, it's not one of the things that he talks about directly, but it's like, because of the way the world is, it's just people, we don't use our bodies anymore.
Yes.
And so of course we have issues in our bodies, but why is that? Because it's like our lives are too full and complicated, and there's too much automation. Like, it's actually difficult, even if you want to go have, like, even the idea of exercise, it used to be that humans just their bodies, because life's
a separate category now. Yeah, I know.
We'd have to like go to the gym and do repetitive actions with our bodies, which feel mechanical. So anyway.
Yeah. No, I agree. There is actually a whole conversation I'd love to have with you sometime. That's a really good idea about, I guess, like you say, the state of the world, like what is happening out there that is actually bringing people to us. I actually haven't talked to anyone about that in great length, and I have a lot of thoughts about that. There's a lot I'm noticing. I do think, at least from my little perspective on the world, I do think there's a real problem about not being able to distinguish even thoughts from feelings. There's a real and a real problem around, I'm seeing more and more a desire to be completely in control, but not in a helpful way, like be in control of the narrative of one's inner life, and like a wrestling with oneself, but not, it doesn't seem to be in a helpful way. That I can override all my feelings. I can tell myself lots of positive things. I can curate my inner experience to a point that's going to make me feel better and be a better person in the world. And I understand where that's coming from. There's obviously a grain of truth and importance inside that. But I just see so much of what is happening is actually in service of avoiding particular kinds of internal experience that we can't choose. And it's actually in the letting go of the battle and trying to let ourselves just notice all of that. That is the healing. Is a bit of a loaded word, but it's the helpful approach that I see in my work. It's not the trying to add new layers on top to stifle things down. And when I notice feeling angry, just tell myself, no, I don't have a right to, or like just keep pushing it down. It's actually just noticing the distinction between having that inside, but I can still choose my actions. Anyway, there's a lot I could say about that. You've got so many resources online. I really admire that. It's something that I keep meaning to do, and I never get around to doing. So I really admire your dedication and ability to get all that up there. I did momentarily try, not for very long, the sort of shutting your eyes and the primacy of hearing.
Yeah.
I loved that. That was really interesting. We look at the eyes quite a bit too, probably not to the same degree, but I find the eyes fascinating just in general. I always have. But the avoiding eye contact even is just the first. It's like that's just a basic tell that this person, that's a tactical defense. There's some emotion coming up that the person is avoiding, and we all do it. And so even just that, yeah.
Well, and if I don't want to make eye contact with you and I do this, funny thing is also I just tip my skull in front of my spine. So this could also be neck pain. Like, I don't want to make eye contact, but this could lead to my head is falling off my spine.
That's so interesting.
All of these things, and I mean, in my work, what I've come to understand also is a long spine, that's dignity, right? If I can stand tall and look you in the face, but it's also literally better for the vertebra if my eyes are on the horizon, if my head is on top, right? So
It's actually what anger wants you to do too, a lot of the time. Like to a degree, it can be, if you channel it in an assertive way, it is a standing up and taking some space, right?
yes,
And this is
yes,
often, really what you see in people who are much more subservient and that fall and hunch and go
right.
small. They are very, very defended against anger, and part of it is doing that too. It's the doing the opposite movement to what it, yeah.
Right. And you can't project your voice in a way that if I said stop doing that, you would actually feel like you needed to stop, because I'm like,
Right.
stop that. It's like, I'm not going to stop. And I'm like, stop. Then it's like, oh, okay. But to project my voice is also a question of posture and all of this, so it is quite amazing how these things happen. You can look at animals,
Mhm.
right, or look at children, and you can see they're not stuck in their psychology. Their
Uh,
body is leading, right, and they just
what a
express it.
freedom! What a freedom! Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's been really nice to finally touch base. I know it's been a long time coming.
it took a
Um,
while for us to
it
schedule, but
took
it
a
took.
long time. Mostly sick children on my end was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
problem.
Well,
Um,
yeah, it feels good, and I can definitely see there's plenty more we could talk about. I can imagine sharing resources and whatnot.
yeah,
Whenever I meet someone like you, I always like to fantasize, well, what if I knew everything that they knew too?
yeah. No, me too. I'm just like,
But yeah, but there are some really, I mean, what I appreciate is that we were able to kind of map what we do onto what the other one is doing so much. And I think, like, it's not like I got it all figured out, but I have noticed from like meditative practices to I don't know, John Vervaeke's dialectic and the dialogos. Just pick any number of practices you want, and there's certain things they all tend to do. They tend to slow down. They tend to help a person differentiate. They tend to make something scary a little safer. They tend to do all of these things, and so it's too simplistic to say it's all the same practice, but there's a part of me that sees it that way. Like
yeah,
we're all working on the same thing, just from different angles. But it's really helpful to see that, because we can also get so
mm,
kind of in the part that I know how to work with that we don't see,
yeah,
you know, and it's often the same thing I already know how to do, but applied elsewhere.
yes.
And so to me, that's always encouraging.
I agree. I think it actually adds to the rigor that you can see the same principles being played out in completely different approaches, and that they are also being effective. I think it actually increases the rigor of the underlying principles as opposed to, because I of course there are multiple entryways, and I actually think of it as like different languages, and some people will naturally I think we'll naturally find it more useful to enter into these principles and allow those principles to work on them through going and seeing someone to work on their neck versus signing up to the idea of sitting down and talking with someone in therapy. Um,
Yep.
and I think that's great. I think that that's normal and healthy. And the idea that there would just be one thing, there's only one way that you can do this. To me would sound like a cult or something. So, so I actually love that there's different ways of entering into the same kind of experience ultimately, with the same kinds of learnings potentially and changes that take place. Um, but yeah, I did make a sort of a list of notes that I haven't even got to in our conversation. So I might piece those together after thinking about this. I do feel like I get a better sense now of what you do, and that's helpful. That's really
Yeah.
helpful. Then we
You know,
can, yeah.
the other suggestion, if you find the time, is just to try one of the. I mean, on my channel, I have a number of full-length lessons. I mean, you want to, if you feel it in your body, but I think you'll be able to match it onto what we've talked about.
Absolutely, I will.
I have a 16-week online group coaching program. It's called Grounded Connection. I like to say it's about learning how to fall in love with your life again.
Oh,
And so we do movement work, we do meditative work, we do relational work. Um, when I was saying something about the different practices we do, they're kind of all the same practice. I try to teach it that way so that when we do the relational work, we notice how it shows up in our body, or if we work with the body and find more comfort? How does that change our capacity to quiet the mind or be in relationship the way we want to be? And the other piece of it is that I try to show people how to practice anytime and anywhere. So it's not just my morning routine, but so that's the main thing that I do out there in the world. And
That's wonderful. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.